The caterpillar's skin rippled. A slit opened behind its head, and something pale pushed through, the glistening head of a wasp. Lava wriggling into the air. More followed. Dozens squirmed out of the living caterpillar. Slick with the fluid of the host they'd been eating from the inside, its legs twitched. Its breathing continued. It was still alive, even with its insides hollowed out to feed this brood. The larvae gathered on the branch and began spinning white silk cocoons, a neat cluster of pupae like tiny sleeping bags. Then the caterpillar moved. It didn't collapse or curl up to die. It crawled onto the mass of cocoons and stood over them, rigid head cocked like a sentry. The creature devoured from within was now guarding what had destroyed it. It had stopped eating entirely. It would never eat again. Why would a creature with no genetic stake guard its own killers? And what keeps it fighting until it starves? Amir Grossman leaned closer to the branch. A stink bug was advancing on the white cocoons, step by deliberate step. The caterpillar, still alive, still oozing from the exit wounds, crawled on top of the pupal mass and froze. Then it exploded. It whipped its head side to side, slamming the stink bug again and again until the predator fled. Grossman set up controlled trials. He placed caterpillars that had hosted wasps beside their cocoons and introduced predators. Every time, the host positioned itself over the pupae and attacked. Head swings, lunges, strikes that drove off bugs many times the caterpillar's size. The guarding cut predation by nearly half. The caterpillar never ate, never rested. It stood sentinel over the sleeping wasps, starving, until the adult parasitoids emerged and abandoned the shriveled body. A creature with zero genetic investment in these insects was dying for them. Something inside that caterpillar had been overwritten. Grossman needed to know what. So Grossman's team started a grim census. They opened caterpillar after caterpillar, peeling back the skin and counting what squirmed inside. The pattern was absolute. Every caterpillar standing guard over the pupae carried passengers, 1 or 2 wasp larvae, still alive, still buried deep in the host's flesh. Caterpillars that had expelled every last larva did nothing. No thrashing, no defense. They collapsed and died without a fight. When researchers surgically removed those final 1 or 2 larvae from a guarding caterpillar, the bodyguard behavior vanished within hours. The host simply stopped. The signal was not a fading chemical ghost. It was a living presence, an active saboteur hidden inside the animal's own body, controlling it from within. The caterpillar was not fighting for itself. It was fighting because something still inside it demanded protection. Which left one question hanging in the air. How can just 2 tiny larvae override an entire nervous system and dictate behavior? The 2 larvae still inside the caterpillar were not stragglers. They were the plan. While their siblings spun silk outside, these ones stayed behind in the hemolymph, the caterpillar's blood, and began secreting a different kind of weapon. The compound spread through the insect's body, reaching nerve clusters, muscles, brain. They did not poison, they rewired. The feeding drive, the most fundamental command in any caterpillar's existence, simply switched off. The animal stopped chewing, stopped digesting, stopped registering hunger at all. At the same time, the defensive reflex dialed to its maximum. Normally a last-ditch thrash reserved for a predator's grip. Now the threshold vanished. A shadow, a vibration, the faintest brush of an antenna, and the caterpillar lunged. It swung its head with mechanical violence, striking at anything that approached the silk cocoons. The host was no longer a caterpillar in any meaningful sense. It was a bodyguard running on borrowed instructions. And those instructions came with a cost written into the chemistry. Without feeding, The caterpillar burned through its fat stores, then its muscle, then the last reserves keeping its organs alive. It would starve to death standing upright, swaying over the pupae, defending them until its own cells gave out. The saboteurs inside had not just hijacked a nervous system, they had set a timer. The stink bug came first, a predator drawn by the scent of immobile pupae. It crept across the leaf, antennae testing the air. The caterpillar's head whipped sideways, jaws snapping on empty space. The bug scrambled backward and dropped from the leaf entirely. That was day 1. By day 3, the caterpillar's body had shrunk by nearly a third. Its skin hung loose over the ridges of its segments, and the green of its flesh had faded to a jaundiced yellow. Still, it swayed. Still, it thrashed. A second stink bug approached from the opposite angle. The caterpillar twisted, legs scrabbling for purchase on the drying leaf, and drove it off with the same violent desperation. Researchers who watched this unfold recorded something remarkable. The caterpillar's attacks cut predation on the pupae by roughly half. A dying animal, running on chemical orders from the creatures that had eaten it from the inside, was successfully protecting their next generation. But the cost was absolute. Each thrash burned through muscle that would never be rebuilt. Each hour of standing guard drained reserves that could not be replenished. The caterpillar was not just starving, it was spending its own death on installment, one defensive strike at a time, and the timer the larvae had set inside it was still ticking. Then the silk cocoons began to split. Adult wasps pulled themselves free, antennae testing the air, wings still damp and folded. One by one they dried in the sun and lifted away, vanishing into the foliage without a backward glance. And still, the caterpillar held its post. Its head tracked movement that was no longer there, threat reflexes firing through a nervous system running on fumes. The machinery had nothing left to burn. When the last wasp disappeared, the caterpillar simply folded. It collapsed over the empty shells and never rose again. The body that had been a nursery became a grave, and the 1 or 2 larvae that stayed behind to conduct this whole performance, their fate is unknown. They may die inside the host, their purpose complete. Or they may chew their way out days later, having traded a slow exit for their siblings' clean escape. The question hangs in the humid air. Is this a freakish exception? Or does nature keep a whole drawer of such puppeteers waiting to be discovered? And this isn't a one-off. Parasitoid manipulation is a whole genre of biological nightmare. A wasp in Costa Rica turns a spider into a zombie that spins a cocoon shelter instead of a web. In Japan, another species injects a cockroach with venom that kills its escape reflex, then leads it by the antenna like a dog on a leash. A third forces a ladybug to stand frozen over wasp pupae, twitching whenever a predator gets close. The methods differ, but the architecture is the same. Hijack a living body and rewrite its purpose. What sets Glyptopantales apart is the sheer spectacle of the result. A caterpillar hollowed from the inside, dying yet thrashing with more fury than it ever showed when it was whole. That violence is not the caterpillar's. It belongs to the wasp. Biologists have a name for this, the extended phenotype. Genes do not stop at the skin of the organism that carries them. They reach out and reshape the behavior of another creature entirely. The caterpillar's muscles, its nerves, its final hours of life, all of them drafted into a defense system written by wasp DNA. It stopped being a caterpillar long before the larvae chewed their way free. It became a weapon, a shield, a sacrifice. 1 or 2 larvae never left. They stayed inside the hollowed caterpillar alive. And from the darkness of that spent body, they released a chemical signal that flooded the host's nervous system. The caterpillar stopped eating. Its muscles locked into a single posture, head raised, body arched over the silk cocoons glued to its back. When a stink bug approached, antennae brushing the pupae, the caterpillar's head snapped sideways with a violence no caterpillar ever uses to defend itself. The strike connected. The predator retreated. The caterpillar hadn't chosen to fight. Its neurons were firing on instructions written in wasp DNA. Every defensive swing, every hour it stood starving in the heat, belonged to the parasites. The caterpillar's body was a weapon the wasps had built from the inside, and it would hold that post until the adult wasps chewed through their cocoons and flew. Only then did the bodyguard collapse. It curled over the empty papery husks and died. Nothing came to eat it. The rainforest had already taken what it needed.